Hi, I'm Dr. Montagna. We're going to continue these talks on managing menopause, and we're not dealing with the condition of menopause. We're looking at the physiological responses inside to see what we can do with those. In this section, we're going to be talking about estrogen metabolism and what we can do to try and help normalize that. Estrogen is an interesting molecule. It's got the same structure as progesterone, testosterone, cholesterol, DHEA, our adrenal hormones. They're all the same structure. They got 6 hexagons and a pentagon is attached on one side. The different points as you go around the molecule are labeled with numbers. The 2 position of estrogens is a really healthy position. The 4 position is a dangerous estrogen. The 16 position is a real hyperinflammatory estrogen, can create cancerous types of responses. The 17 is totally toxic. It's 100 times more toxic than what a woman can make. That's typically a pharmaceutical estrogen. When we start looking into the estrogens, the microbiome, it's the bacterial coating that we have inside of our gut, has a lot to do with digestion. It has many, many different functions. That has a fair amount of regulatory involvement with the HPA axis, or the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And with that, it affects our behavior quite a bit, hormonal regulation, different things like that. There's hormone receptors throughout the lining of the gut that are regulated by estrogen, and it has a fair amount to do with the function going on inside of the gut. Also, the hormone has an effect on the gut microbiome and the pH of the gut also. So when the flora is really prolific and healthy, it normalizes estrogens. When it's not, pH starts to change, the microbiome starts to change, and that affects our hormones quite a bit. Estrogen also has a pretty big effect on the kidney. It has a lot to do with the phosphorus and calcium regulation that goes on inside of the body. It has a big effect on the functional unit inside the kidney called the nephron, and it also has a huge impact on the size of the kidney. When they start to look at what happens when they decrease estrogen in rats, different studies like that, you start to see the kidneys start to enlarge, trying to keep up with the physiological needs that it needs to. And then we look at, there's estrogen receptors on the outside of most of our cells. Then we have estrogen receptors on the outside of all of our cells. Those will determine a lot of different functions that go on inside of a cell, and it can affect protein synthesis for periods of time, 12 hours after the estrogens have depleted quite a bit. So with that, the estrogens have a significant impact in the protein building and synthesis or making of the proteins inside of the body. It also has a lot to do with the ability of women to deposit fat, and typically a lean woman's body has a lot more fat content than a lean man's body. It primarily has to do with estrogens and the way they were designed in the first place, and that's basically so they can nurture. Estrogens have a significant effect on a global amount of tissues. Primarily, people think about those in reproductive functions. That's what prepares a uterus for getting pregnant. It's what gives a woman all of her cervical mucus secretions, so that's her reproductive tract lubrication. It has to do with libido, breast changes, different things like that. And that estrogen typically excites the different tissues and gets them functioning really well. It's supposed to come after that. Progesterone is supposed to come and calm everything down and soothe everything. Estrogen will make a woman blow it up with fluids. Progesterone makes those fluids go away. It really needs to be an ebb and flow and a balance between those two for it to feel healthy. We started looking at estrogen metabolisms. If estrogens go across it's our diet that really controls a lot of this. And we have a healthy diet full of good nutrients. Estrogens will typically stay in the 2 position and be excretable that way. But if we start to have dietary insufficiencies, hyperinflammatory diets, things along that nature, it'll start to drop down into the 4 position, which is really dangerous, or the 16, which is probably worse. The detoxification happens in 2 phases. Most of the detoxification we look at happens inside the liver, but we get about half of that goes on inside the gut too. There's 2 phases that detoxify. There's a phase 1 and a phase 2. Phase 1 is in both the liver and in the gut. Phase 2 is primarily just in the gut, or just in the liver, excuse me. And most of that is nutrient dependent. So fasting, things like that, don't give the nutrients you need to actually clear toxins. It just hopefully stops the gut from producing more. There's a fair amount of genomic or variations that go on within the detoxification pathways, which will affect the way that we detoxify in our body. And stress will affect those also. Then there's a fair amount of fake estrogens or foreign estrogens. Those are called xeno. Xeno is foreign. Xenoestrogens is foreign estrogens. Those come from a whole bunch of different varieties. Plastics are full of BPA. BPA is probably the most studied of all of the PAs, but it goes from A through M or N. FPA isn't studied nearly as much as BPA. So just because a plastic says it's BPA free doesn't mean it's healthy. It just means they're using a different PA that they haven't studied as much. Along with that, there's phthalates and esters. Those are both estrogenic compounds. The PCBs, those are typically lubricants in the electrical industry, like in the transformers that are in the high tension wires up above. Insecticides and herbicides are estrogen-like compounds. They're xenoestrogens. And parabens are what gives substance inside of lotions, makeups, and creams. Those are foreign estrogens also. Within the estrogens, there's the 3 different forms, the estriol, the estrone, and the estradiol. There's a potential for those to interchange back and forth depending on the body's needs. So a real inflammatory diet can really be significant in trying to help normalize estrogen responses. Then there's a hormone in fat tissues called aromatase. Aromatase will take circulating testosterone, turn those into estrogens, and it can turn circulating estrogens into more toxic estrogens also. Cytochrome P450 is how the first phase of detoxification happens. That's the same system that allows us to absorb nutrients out of our gut. And that's regulated, that whole system is regulated by estrogen receptors. There's 2 estrogen receptors. There's an alpha and a beta receptor. Typically the beta receptor gives a healthier, more normalizing response, which is what we really want to try and upregulate a lot. Flavonoids, the things in fruits and vegetables that give color, and vegetables are healthier than that because we don't have problems with the sugar regulation in the fruits. Those will help normalize the cytochrome P450 system and allow us to process our toxins a lot better. Estrogens also have a fair amount to do with the kidney function, as we have looked at before. There's several processes that go on inside of the kidney that are affected by estrogen receptors. Primarily the estrogen beta that we want to upregulate is going to be in play right there. And one of the principal regulators of the circulating estrogens is the gut microbiome. It's the microbiome that actually decides whether we're going to excrete our toxic estrogens or reabsorb them and recirculate those. With that, it has a huge effect and impact on the HPA axis. It has a lot to do with hormonal regulation and what the microbiome does with the hormones that are being processed and in the gut to try and be excreted. The gut microbiome is also, the studies are starting to show that every hormone that we have could be made by the microbiome. 90% of our serotonin, which is one of our feel-good hormones, is made in the gut. Helps us get rest and and all that. So if the microbiome is messed up, we don't get the hormones we need to have normal, healthy lives. And if the microbiome gets really depleted, if it's beat up, that increases the production of TSH, which increases the thyroid hormones and thyroid function. If the thyroid hormones get much stronger than what the estrogens are in much higher quantity, then it suppresses the estrogen function and start to have a lot of problems with that. Looking at all this, when you start to see all this go on, there's kind of a responsibility to try and give some good answers, good management suggestions on how to help deal with this stuff. And so we start to see why there is a difference in the different cultures with menopause. In India, women don't have it. And in Japan and in Hong Kong, women have very little symptoms. That's primarily because of the lifestyle they have. It's primarily a vegetarian type of a diet. In India, it's solely vegetarian. And in Japan and Hong Kong, there's going to be a fair amount of meats with that also, but a lot of that's going to be fish. Those will really have a pretty big impact on everything that's going on with all this. Then we have foods that are crammed with estrogen. Flax is a food that has the highest amount of estrogen in it. It's phenomenal how much there's in there. Soy has a reasonable amount. Both flax and soy, we don't have much non-GMO, non-sprayed with herbicides and pesticide sources in our country, so that could add even more difficulty with those foreign sources. Legumes or beans, those have estrogens, way less, a lot more manageable. Those are typically more calming as far as that goes, those estrogens. And then there's a foreign estrogen called Zeranol. Zeranol is something that's commonly in implants that is really, really toxic. So we look at the foods that can help with that. Vitamin C rich foods, fruits, potatoes are actually really high in vitamin C, magnesium. That's different greens, different things along that line. Magnesium is what makes chlorophyll active, so anything that's green is going to be full of that. B6 is protein, zinc is shellfish and seafoods. Vitamin E is our seeds. Sulfur will be proteins. Eggs, garlic are really, really high in sulfur, really good for that. Arginine, things like beets are really good. Fiber, best sources of fiber is plant sources. And cholesterol is a really good thing. That's what we build all of our hormones off of. We all need that. Eggs is a really, really healthy source of cholesterol, by the way. So if you like this, hit the like button down below, subscribe to our channel. We'll be back with more explanations on physiology and all these different conditions.